Hello, class. This is Professor Brian Lee, and I'd like to welcome you to Political Science 1 Introduction to Government. I wanted to start off by kind of telling you what this class is about. And Political Science 1 focuses mainly on American government and politics and Californian government and politics. The main point of this class is to give you an introduction to American and Californian political processes and how the government works so that you can get a better understanding of how of how you can participate in the political system and how American government functions. I also kind of want to introduce some more advanced concepts about certain phenomenon that you see in the American political system, and also the ramifications of the of American institution of American governmental institutions. So we're going this semester will focus on kind of answering all of those different questions and exploring those different topics. And it's a lot to cover, but this really is an interesting topic. Now, I do want to point out that this is an online class and not an in-person class, and not a face-to-face lecture class. So because of that, there's going to be a lot. The burden is on you to make sure that you keep up with the material and that you succeed in the class. I highly recommend that you keep up with all the you need to make sure that you keep up with all the material and that you engage in independent study so that you understand the material. And if you ever need any help with anything, I am free to help you. I am free to help out. Now, I do recognize that many of you, some of you might be political science students, or political science majors. However, I recognize that most of you probably aren't, and that you are taking this class, either for your own personal enrichment or because it's general ed. So, for those of you who aren't as familiar with the field of political science, I want to give you a bit of an introduction to the field so that you understand really what we're trying to do here and what you're going to be learning in this field. And so, if you ever kind of get confused as to why I'm teaching something or why you're learning something, you could kind of reference back to this and understand how this relates to the field of political science. So, political science at its core is really the study of power and how it's exercised. And this is an incredibly broad, this is an incredibly broad field. So, one of the ways that power is most commonly exercised is through, through a government. And when you study a lot of political science courses, you're going to study things. You're going to study government. So how do things like governments function? How do what types of government structures there are, and how they affect the way power is exercised. Another key point too is how do governments interact with the government. So really, how do rulers interact with the people that they're in charge of? That's a really big question that we see in political science. The other thing too is that governments don't only interact with their own people; they also interact with other governments. And one of the issues that we will be discuss, that a lot of political scientists seek to answer is, well, what are the methods that governments use to interact with other governments and other actors, that they might deal with. And another key issue in political science is how do governments interact with non-governmental organizations. So there are things like organized crime groups or terrorist organizations or militia groups that governments interact with quite often. So there growing in the 20th century we've seen the rise of non-government actors like terrorist organizations. And this is really a new emerging issue in kind of a new issue in political science is how do governments respond and respond to these types of organizations. And lastly, another key question too is with the rise of non-government actors and organizations, how do they exercise power? Again, this is since non-government organizations are a relatively new phenomenon, this is a new question that political scientists are grappling with right now. So things we might study in political science. You can see first this picture with the U.S. Capitol building. A major thing we study in political science is how governmental institutions and how that affects the way um, you know, how that affects the way that governments are, you, the interaction between people and the government. Here too in like the middle, top middle, we have a picture of the UN Security Council. So this is kind of this relates to international relations and how states interact with each other. Here in the top right, we have a picture of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. So this is an example of political scientists grapple with how do governments interact with things like terrorist organizations or non-state actors. An emerging part too is how do emerging field of study within political science is how governments interact with social movements, and what makes social movements succeed or fail. Lastly, and these two topics are some of are personally the ones I'm most interested in. But how do governments use military force or violence to achieve its objectives? And another really interesting part too is how does organized crime interact with like prohibition, or like gangsters or organized crime interact with governments. So these are all very interesting topics that we grapple with within the field of political science. So just kind of wanted to because when most people think of political science, they just think about governments, but political science incorporates far more than just basic government functions. It includes all these things that are in my opinion are extremely interesting. So for political science one, we are focused mainly on American government and Californian government. And so, basically, the key question that we're trying to answer in political science one is how is power exercised within America and California? So we're going to learn a lot about how the American government and political system functions, and also how how California's government and political system operates. We're also going to try to learn more about how government and politics affects your everyday life. Government actions really do have a big action on your everyday life, and it's very important that you understand that and understand how the government affects you. Also, since we do live in a democracy, I something I'm hoping that you learn from this class is how you yourself can engage and participate more in in American democracy if you so choose. And lastly, I think that what's really important in this class is, regardless of anything like grades or and stuff, is that you just learn, you become a more informed citizen, and you become more educated about how about the world around you. So these are kind of like the key objectives that we have in this class. So within political science, there's kind of a lot of different branches, and I kind of separate these out into two different types. There's two like overarching themes when we're classifying branches of political science. And the first overarching theme is how is power exercised? So a lot of the classes at College of the Desert focus on this question. So things like American government, this class focus on how is power exercised within the United States. There's comparative government, where where we kind of compare the different governmental systems around the world and kind of try to explain how different countries around the world exercise power, and how the political institutions in each country affects political outcomes. There's also international relations, which is the study of how governments interact with each other, and to an increasing extent, how governments interact with foreign non-governmental organizations or groups also. So that's a really interesting field in my opinion. There's also at College of the Desert, we also teach a class on the American presidency. So how does the American president exercise power? And we also teach some global studies classes at the college too. And these relate to issues about how power is exercised around the world, not only by governments but also by things like businesses or individuals too. So again, these are those are pretty interesting topics too. Now, on the other side, we have kind of more of a normative, more of a normative study of power, which kind of focuses on how should power be exercised. So, at College of the Desert, things like political theory or political philosophy goes over topics like about how power should be exercised and what governments ought to do. And then there's also the field of public policy, which focuses on, well, what policy should be enacted to bring out the greatest good for a country. Unfortunately, at College of the Desert, we do not have any public policy classes because those are kind of advanced classes that you need to study for your like a bachelor's degree or even a master's degree. But if you are interested in public policy, I would highly recommend that you take classes in economics, writing, and statistics, because those are skills that you use in the public policy sector. I would also, for those of you who are political science majors or are thinking about, or you are just interested in the topic, these are kind of some courses that are helpful for, people who want to pursue careers in political science. So, at College of the Desert, we have classes in communications, economics, global studies, mass communication and media, philosophy, which most people don't really understand how that connects to political science, but philosophy classes do really help you learn how to write and how to write and make extremely complex arguments. So it is a really it really is important that if you want to work in policy, you develop those skills. Also statistics. So statistics is something that's commonly used in public policy. So that's pretty obvious why you should study that. And also research. Public policy and politics is fundamentally about research. So that's definitely a skill you need to develop if you want to either study this major or if you want to or if you want to advance within careers in political science. So for those of you who are studying political science, there's a long list of different types of careers that you could pursue in this field. So many people who study political science are going to go on to become government officials. They might work in the nonprofit sector or with some sort of political campaign. Many who study political science are also going to become attorneys. So that's a very lucrative route for you. Many who study political science also go into business or finance or finance or banking. A lot of those careers rely. You need to be knowledgeable about about developments in politics. So political science majors are oftentimes successful in business or finance. And lastly, there's also a lot of lucrative careers in journalism and public relations for people who study this field. There are this isn't an exhaustive list. There are more careers within this field, but these are kind of the most common careers that people in political science go into. So really, to succeed in this class, you definitely need to exercise discipline and make sure that you keep up with the class. So things like participating, keeping up the readings and your assignments, and keeping up with the class are very important to succeed. I also encourage you to participate in class discussions and discussion forums so that you could engage with your students and kind of have like peer-to-peer learning. It's also important that you kind of figure out how you learn. I know many of you are new to college, and not everyone learns the same way. Some people learn better by reading. Some people learn better by taking notes. Some people learn better by watching YouTube videos. So really, try to find what works best for you and kind of follow that. I do provide material here to facilitate learning, but there are other resources out there too that I would encourage you to look at if those help you learn the material better. I also think that it's important for you to develop strong critical thinking, writing, and verbal argument skills. Those are, regardless of what career you pursue in the future, those are incredibly valuable. Lastly, another thing too is I do the whole point of coming to school is so that you can learn, and in order to do that, you have to be able to challenge the beliefs that you already have. So I do, if you're interacting with other students in this class, I highly recommend that you take other people's arguments seriously and kind of challenge your own beliefs so that you could you could expand your own horizons. And that's what the whole point of school is. Another thing too is you should try to apply what you've learned outside of the classroom. And lastly, try to make friends. College is more fun if you have friends.